Most people knock on a door at 1 in the morning because they are drunk, desperate, or dying. Sadie was 2 out of the 3. When the heavy oak door of the penthouse swung open, Declan didn't look at her face first. He looked at the marble hallway floor, no shoes. Then his gaze snapped to her left arm. A slow, dark stain was spreading across the cheap gray cotton of her cardigan. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked up at him, rain dripping from her chin, and whispered, "I didn't call the police." The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Declan Hayes' penthouse, casting fractured, watery shadows across the Brazilian hardwood. It was 1:14 a.m. Declan was not asleep. He hadn't slept a full night since he was 22, back when he still believed a man could run an empire without getting his hands dirty. He was sitting in the leather wingback chair in his study, a glass of neat rye whiskey untouched on the side table, staring at a set of shipping manifests. The Hayes Logistics Corporation moved thousands of tons of freight across the eastern seaboard every month. Electronics, textiles, automotive parts, and, hidden behind false bulkheads in every 10th container, unregistered firearms moving quietly down the coast. When the private elevator chime echoed through the silent apartment, Declan didn't jump. He simply reached into the top drawer of his desk, his fingers wrapping around the cold, familiar grip of a suppressed Sig Sauer. Only 3 people had the bypass code to send the elevator directly to his floor. 2 of them were currently in Chicago handling a union dispute. Declan walked down the hallway, his footsteps making no sound. He stood by the door, listening. No heavy breathing, no shuffling of tactical boots, just the faint rhythmic sound of water dripping onto the marble. He racked the slide, thumbed off the safety, and pulled the door open. Sadie Collins stood in the hallway. For a span of 3 seconds, Declan's mind, usually a steel trap of calculations and contingencies, stalled. Sadie was his executive secretary. For 3 years, she had been a fixture of his daylight existence. She wore beige trench coats, kept her dark hair pinned back in ruthless, practical clips, and typed 90 words a minute. She knew exactly how he took his coffee. She knew how to politely stonewall federal inspectors. She was a civilian. A quiet, unassuming woman who went home at 5:30 to a cat and a collection of paperback novels in a rent-controlled apartment. Right now, she looked like a ghost that had been dragged through a slaughterhouse. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her skull in wet ropes. She wasn't wearing shoes. Her pale feet were smeared with street grime and soot. Her right hand was clamped white-knuckled over her left bicep. Beneath her fingers, the gray wool of her cardigan was saturated with a thick, wet blackness that was dripping steadily onto the pristine hallway floor. "Sadie," Declan said. His voice was a low, gravelly scrape in the quiet hallway. She swayed, her knees buckling slightly. Declan didn't think. The gun dropped to his side as his left hand shot out, grabbing her by the uninjured shoulder. He hauled her over the threshold. He didn't ask if she was okay. Men in his line of work knew that was a stupid question. Instead, he kicked the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and looked down both ends of the empty hallway before turning back to her. "Were you followed?" he asked. Sadie shook her head. Her teeth were chattering, a sharp clicking sound that cut through the silence. I took the subway. 3 different trains. I walked the last 20 blocks. I checked the reflections in the storefronts. No one. Declan narrowed his eyes. The fact that his quiet secretary knew how to run a counter-surveillance route was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, she was bleeding on his rug. "Let me see the arm," he ordered. He guided her toward the guest bathroom, his hand firmly on the small of her back. She felt terribly fragile through the wet fabric of her coat. She was trembling so violently that it vibrated up his own arm. He flipped the light switch with his elbow. The harsh fluorescent glare of the bathroom made her look even worse. Her skin was the color of old paper. Her lips were a bruised blue. "Sit on the lid," Declan instructed, nodding toward the toilet. He set the Sig Sauer on the marble counter, right next to a monogrammed hand towel. Sadie stared at the gun. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just looked at it with empty, glassy eyes, and then looked back at him. That disturbed Declan more than the blood. He crouched in front of her. "I have to cut the sleeve. If I pull it, the fabric will tear whatever clot has formed." "Okay," she whispered. Declan reached into his pocket and produced a tactical folding knife. It flicked open with a sharp metallic snick. He saw her eyes track the blade, but she held perfectly still. He slid the cold steel under the soggy wool of her cardigan and the silk blouse beneath it, slicing upward. The fabric parted. Declan pulled the ruined clothing away from her arm. It wasn't a bullet wound. It was a clean, deep slice, about 4 inches long, carving through the outer muscle of her bicep. The bleeding had slowed to an ugly, sluggish weep, but it needed stitches. A lot of them. "Defensive wound," Declan muttered, his eyes narrowing as he examined the angle of the cut. "Someone came at you with a blade. You threw your arm up to protect your face." Sadie swallowed hard. "Yes." "Who?" She closed her eyes. "Greg, from accounting." Declan froze. Greg from accounting. A man Declan knew for a fact was not a simple accountant. Greg was a mole. Declan had spent the last 3 weeks letting Greg dig through dummy files while his men traced who Greg was reporting back to. The hit was scheduled for Thursday. "What were you doing with Greg, Sadie?" Declan asked. His tone was perfectly level, which, to anyone who truly knew him, was the most dangerous sound in the world. "I forgot my keys," she said, her voice hollow. "I went back to the office at 11. The lights were off on the executive floor, but I saw the glow from the archives. I thought it was security. I went to tell them I was there." He was at the server rack. He had a hard drive plugged in. Declan grabbed a clean white towel and pressed it firmly against the wound. Sadie hissed, her jaw clenching tight, but she didn't pull away. "He heard me," she continued, staring at a spot on the bathroom tile. "He turned around. He looked cornered, like an animal. I told him I was leaving. I told him I didn't see anything, but he pulled a knife from his jacket." She stopped. Her breathing hitched, shallow and fast. "Sadie, look at me." Declan reached up with his free hand, tilting her chin until her eyes met his. "You're alive, which means he didn't finish the job. Where is Greg now?" "He's in the server room." "Is he breathing?" Sadie's dark eyes locked onto his, stripping away 3 years of polite, professional distance. "No," she said. "I left the heavy-duty shears in his throat." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing the glass in the other room. Declan stared at the woman sitting on his bathroom counter. Sadie Collins, the woman who brought him chamomile tea when he had a headache. the woman who organized the company charity drives and always bought the receptionist a birthday cake. She had just killed a man, a trained operative, no less. Declan slowly removed the blood-soaked towel from her arm to check the wound. It was deep, but it hadn't hit an artery. He stepped away and opened the mirrored cabinet, pulling out a black tactical trauma kit. "You're going to need stitches," he said, his voice flat. "I can do it, or I can call a doctor who won't ask questions. But the doctor is 30 minutes away, and you're going into shock." "Do it," she said. Her voice was raspy, but the trembling in her hands had slowed. The adrenaline was burning off, leaving a cold, hard exhaustion in its wake. Declan washed his hands with surgical precision. He snapped on a pair of black nitrile gloves. He poured a heavy dose of rubbing alcohol over a gauze pad. "This is going to burn like hell," he warned. "I know." He pressed the alcohol-soaked pad into the open wound. Sadie's back arched, going completely rigid. A low, strangled sound escaped her throat, her knuckles turning bone white as she gripped the edge of the toilet seat. But she didn't scream. Declan worked quickly. He threaded the curved needle and began pulling the flesh back together. He had stitched up mobsters who whined more than the woman sitting in front of him. "How did you do it?" he asked quietly, pulling the first suture tight. He needed to keep her talking. Keep her tethered to the room so she didn't pass out. "He lunged," Sadie said, her breath hitching as the needle pierced her skin again. "I grabbed a binder, threw it at his face. It distracted him for a second. He slashed my arm. I stumbled backward into your desk. The shears were sitting right next to your pen cup." Declan remembered them. Heavy forged steel scissors used for opening bulk packaging. "He came at me again," she whispered, staring blankly at the wall. "I didn't think. I just drove them up, under the jaw." He dropped the knife. He fell backward. "There was so much blood, Mr. Hayes. So much blood." "Declan," she blinked, looking down at him. "What?" "If you kill a man in my office and show up at my apartment in the middle of the night, you can stop calling me Mr. Hayes." He tied off the final stitch and snipped the thread. 6 neat black knots against her pale skin. He grabbed a roll of medical tape and a fresh bandage, securing the wound tightly. He stripped off the gloves, tossing them into the trash can. "Why didn't you go to the police, Sadie?" She laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound without a shred of humor. "And tell them what? That an accountant attacked me while stealing files? The police would take me to a precinct. They would put me in a room. And then whoever Greg works for would send a lawyer or a dirty cop, and I would hang myself in a holding cell by morning." Declan went still. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, studying her. The disguise was slipping. The mild-mannered secretary was gone. The woman sitting in front of him was calculating, cynical, and dangerously observant. "You know who I am," Declan said softly. It wasn't a question. Sadie pulled her good arm across her chest, suddenly aware of the damp, cold blouse clinging to her skin. "I'm not stupid, Declan. I see the cargo manifests. I see the discrepancies in the freight weights. I see the men who come into your office on Tuesday afternoons, wearing suits that cost more than my car. Men with knuckles that look like crushed gravel. You run a logistics company, yes, but you also run the docks. All of them." Declan's jaw tightened. If she knew all this, she was a liability. A massive one. In his world, liabilities were dealt with quickly, quietly, and permanently. A dark part of his brain, the part that kept him alive and at the top of the food chain, whispered that he should just snap her neck right now and have Leo dump her in the river with Greg. But as he looked at her barefoot, shivering, sitting in his bathroom with his blood on her arm, that thought evaporated. "So," Declan said slowly, testing the waters, "you knew I was a criminal, and when you killed a man tonight, you decided your best chance of survival was to run to the biggest monster you knew." Sadie looked him dead in the eye. "Yes." Declan felt an unexpected, unfamiliar pull in his chest. It wasn't pity, it was respect. "Take off the wet clothes," he ordered, turning his back to her and opening a linen closet. He pulled out a thick gray cotton t-shirt and a pair of oversized sweatpants. He laid them on the counter. "Dry off. Put these on. Come out to the living room when you're done." He didn't wait for her to answer. He grabbed his gun from the counter and walked out, pulling the bathroom door shut behind him. Declan walked into the living room and picked up his phone from the coffee table. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Yeah, boss," Leo's gravelly voice came through the speaker, thick with sleep. "Wake up. I need a cleanup crew at the downtown office," Declan said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "Third floor, server room." Leo grunted, the sound of rustling sheets echoing through the receiver. "Who made the mess?" "Doesn't matter. It's Greg from accounting. He's dead." A pause. "Greg? I thought we were bagging him on Thursday. Who punched his ticket?" Declan looked toward the hallway, where the faint sound of running water could be heard from the bathroom. "A complication. Listen to me carefully, Leo. I want the body gone before the sun comes up. I want the server room scrubbed with bleach. Replace the carpet if you have to, and access the security mainframe. Wipe all camera footage from 11 p.m. onward. Everything. Erase the hard drives and physically destroy them." "You got it, boss. What about the flash drive he was stealing?" "Check his pockets, check the floor, find it and bring it directly to me." Declan hung up the phone. He walked over to the bar cart, grabbed a second crystal tumbler, and poured a generous measure of rye whiskey. He was standing by the window, watching the rain hammer against the city skyline, when he heard her quiet footsteps on the hardwood. He turned. Sadie stood at the edge of the living room. The oversized gray t-shirt swallowed her frame, hanging halfway down her thighs. She had rolled the sleeves up to avoid rubbing against her fresh stitches. Her hair was still damp, but combed back. The dirt and blood had been washed from her feet and hands. She looked small, but she didn't look broken. Declan picked up the glass of whiskey and held it out to her. She walked forward, closing the distance between them, and took it. Her fingers brushed his. Her skin was still ice cold. She lifted the glass and took a long, burning swallow, not coughing as the cheap fire slid down her throat. "Thank you," she rasped. Declan took a sip from his own glass. "My men are at the office. The body will be gone. The cameras will be wiped. By tomorrow morning, it will be as if Greg from accounting decided to skip town without telling anyone." Sadie stared into her amber liquid, swirling it gently. "What about me? What about you?" "I know too much," she said, stating it as a simple, objective fact. "I knew too much before tonight. Now I know everything." "You're a pragmatist, Declan. The pragmatic thing to do would be to throw me off this balcony." Declan stepped closer. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and imposing, and he knew how to use his size to intimidate. He stood just inches from her, looking down into her dark, tired eyes. The pragmatic thing, Declan said softly, his voice a low rumble, would be to fire you. But finding a secretary who can anticipate my schedule, forge my signature perfectly, and gut a federal mole with a pair of office shears is difficult. A faint, trembling breath escaped her lips. You aren't a liability, Sadie. You're an asset, and I protect my assets. He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently brushing a stray lock of damp hair away from her face. His thumb lingered, just for a fraction of a second, against her jawline. Sadie didn't pull away. She tilted her head into his touch, just a millimeter. A silent, desperate surrender to the safety he offered. You're going to sleep in the guest room tonight, Declan ordered, stepping back and breaking the spell, though the air between them still crackled with heavy, unspoken tension. Tomorrow, you're going to call in sick, and then we are going to figure out who Greg was working for, because whoever sent him into my server room is going to bleed. Sadie nodded slowly. And after that? Declan finished his whiskey and set the glass down with a hard clink. After that, he said, his eyes darkening, you're getting a raise. Waking up did not happen all at once. It came in violent, disjointed fragments. First was the smell. Bleach and high-end fabric softener. Second was the pain. A dull, rhythmic throbbing in her left arm that synchronized perfectly with her heartbeat. Sadie opened her eyes. The ceiling was a vast expanse of charcoal-painted drywall. She wasn't in her apartment. She was in a bed the size of a small island, tangled in sheets with a thread count higher than her credit score. Then, the memory dropped on her chest like an anvil. Greg's eyes. The harsh fluorescent light of the server room. The sickening wet resistance of forged steel pushing through cartilage and muscle. Sadie sat up fast. Bile rose in her throat. She threw her legs over the edge of the mattress, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood, and forced herself to breathe. In. Out. She gripped her knees with her good hand. She expected the tears to come. She expected the crushing weight of guilt that television and movies promised followed a murder, but it didn't arrive. Instead, she felt a profound, chilling emptiness, followed by a spike of adrenaline. She was alive. Greg was dead. If she had to do it again, she would thrust the shears a little higher to end it quicker. The bedroom door clicked open. Declan stood in the frame. He was dressed in a crisp black dress shirt and dark slacks, looking completely unbothered by the fact that he was harboring a killer. In his hand, he held a ceramic mug. He walked over and set it on the nightstand. Black coffee. Steam curled off the rim. You didn't scream in your sleep, Declan noted, his voice flat, neutral. He pulled up a leather armchair and sat down opposite the bed. Most people screamed the first night. I was too tired, Sadie said. Her voice sounded like crushed glass. She reached for the mug with her right hand. The heat seeped into her cold fingers. Did Leo call? He did. The server room is pristine. Bleach, ozone generators, industrial carpet cleaner. The night shift security guard was paid an extra $10,000 to forget his own name, let alone anything he saw on the monitors before the footage was wiped. Declan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Greg is currently resting at the bottom of an abandoned limestone quarry in New Jersey. Sadie took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter. And the flash drive. Declan reached into his pocket and tossed a small silver thumb drive onto the bed sheets. It landed with a soft thud. Leo found it under the server rack, but it's encrypted, military-grade hash. My tech guy says it will take 3 days to brute force the password. Sadie stared at the little piece of metal. 3 days was a lifetime in the criminal underworld. If Greg missed a check-in, whoever he worked for would know the operation was blown. They would scatter, or worse, they would strike. She set her coffee down. He was a mole in accounting. Yes. Do you know how boring accounting is, Declan? Sadie looked up at him. It is soul-crushing. Greg was supposed to be auditing the quarterly freight expenses. I sat 2 desks away from him on Tuesdays. He was sloppy. He chewed on his pens. He complained about the dual-factor authentication on our intranet every single morning. Declan narrowed his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying a man who complains about typing a 6-digit code into his email doesn't memorize a 50-character alphanumeric encryption key. He writes it down. Sadie stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she locked her knees. Where are his ledgers, the physical ones from his desk? Declan stared at her for a long moment. Then, he pulled his phone from his pocket. Leo, bring the boxes from the 3rd floor up to the penthouse. 20 minutes later, the massive glass dining table in Declan's living room was covered in thick green-lined accounting books. Leo, a man built like a cinder block with a scarred jawline and a permanent scowl, stood by the window. He kept shooting sideways glances at Sadie, who was currently wearing Declan's oversized clothes, a fresh bandage on her arm, and an expression of absolute focus. I still don't like this, boss, Leo rumbled, his arms crossed over his chest. She's civilian. She gutted a man with office supplies last night, Leo, Declan replied without looking up from the papers. The civilian status has been revoked. Shut up and help her look. Sadie ignored them both. She flipped through the pages of Q3's expense reports, columns of numbers, red ink and black ink. She knew what to look for. Greg was arrogant. Arrogant men always thought they were smarter than everyone else in the room. Here, Sadie said. Declan walked around the table, standing close behind her. She could feel the heat radiating off him. He smelled of bergamot and expensive gun oil. She pointed to the bottom margin of page 42. Mixed in with a series of scribbled calculations were random letters and numbers. He disguised it as a tax ID number and a routing code. Look at the spacing. It doesn't match the standard banking format. Declan pulled a laptop toward them, inserted the flash drive, and brought up the password prompt. He typed the string of numbers and letters exactly as Sadie had pointed out. He hit enter. The progress bar flashed green. Access granted. Leo let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Declan opened the root folder. The screen populated with hundreds of PDF files, intercepted emails, and manifest schedules. But one file was sitting alone on the desktop, tagged with a red priority flag. Declan clicked it. A blueprint filled the screen. It was Pier 40. The Hayes Logistics primary deep water dock. Red arrows marked the security patrols, the blind spots in the camera coverage, and the exact location of container 88-4. Declan's posture went rigid. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Container 8804, Leo said, his gravelly voice dropping to a whisper. That's the heavy machinery shipment from Odessa, arriving tomorrow night. It's not machinery, Declan said. His eyes were dark, locked onto the screen. It's $4 million worth of untraceable Serbian assault rifles. Sadie looked at the screen, then at Declan. They aren't just stealing data. They're planning a hijack, and thanks to Greg, they have our patrol routes. Declan slammed the laptop shut. Call Garrett. Call the precinct captains on our payroll. I want a lockdown on Pier 40. Nobody breathes near that water without my permission. Wait, Sadie said. Both men looked at her. If you lock down the pier, they'll know Greg is dead, and the drive was compromised, she said, her voice steady, despite the rapid beating of her heart. They'll abort, they'll disappear, and you will spend the next 6 months looking over your shoulder for the next mole, the next hit. Declan turned fully to face her. What's the alternative, Sadie? We let them come. The atmosphere in the boardroom at the Hayes Logistics corporate office was lethal. 6 men sat around the mahogany table. These were Declan's lieutenants. The men who controlled the docks, the unions, the protection rackets, and the bribery funds. They wore tailored suits that failed to hide the thick muscle and jagged scars beneath. And sitting at Declan's right hand was Sadie. She was back in her own clothes, a fresh white blouse purchased by Leo that morning, a sleek black pencil skirt, and sensible heels. The bandage on her arm was hidden beneath a tailored blazer. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, ignoring the blatant hostility radiating from the men around the table. "This is a joke, right?" Garrett asked. He was a lean, twitchy man who ran the extortion rings in the Diamond District. He pointed a gold-ringed finger at Sadie. Why is the secretary sitting in on a war council? Because the secretary is the reason we aren't walking into an ambush tomorrow night, Declan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a whip. Sadie stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave through the window. They were on the 40th floor. No one moved. Declan pressed a button on a remote, and a projector illuminated the far wall with the blueprint of Pier 40. Thomas Carver, Declan stated, speaking the name like a curse. A collective murmur went through the table. Carver ran a vicious Irish syndicate operating out of South Boston. He had been trying to get a foothold in New York for 3 years. He was brutal, lacking the quiet, methodical precision that Declan utilized. Carver bought our accountant, Declan continued. He has the shipping schedule for the Odessa drop. He has our patrol routes. He plans to hit Pier 40 at 2 a.m. on Friday. Garrett, what's your defensive strategy? Garrett sat up, clearing his throat. We reinforce the main gate, put snipers on the crane towers. When Carver's trucks roll up, we bottleneck them at the entrance. We light them up before they even get a sniff of the container. No, the word was spoken softly, but it silenced the room. All eyes turned to Sadie. Garrett's face flushed dark red. Excuse me? Sadie didn't flinch. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. If you bottleneck them at the main gate, they have an escape route straight back onto the interstate. Carver won't be leading the strike team himself. He'll send mercenaries. If they start taking heavy fire, they'll just reverse and flee. You'll kill a few foot soldiers, but Carver remains untouched. So, what do you suggest, sweetheart? Garrett sneered. We just let them drive in? Yes, Sadie said. She picked up a laser pointer from the table and aimed it at the projected blueprint. A green dot appeared on the southern end of the pier. 3 weeks ago, I submitted a maintenance order for the hydraulic locks on Gate 4. The southern gate. The parts are back ordered. It has to be opened and closed manually. She looked around the table. The men were actually listening now. Carver's men have the security details from Greg, Sadie continued. They know Gate 4 is broken. They won't hit the main entrance. They'll come through the south side because it's quiet. So, we let them. We pull the guards back. We let their trucks roll all the way into the center of the loading yard. Right here. She circled a tight, enclosed section of the pier, surrounded by towering stacks of shipping containers. Once they are in the center, we manually lock Gate 4 behind them, Sadie finished, setting the laser pointer down. They are boxed in, a steel canyon, no escape route. You don't bottleneck them at the door, Garrett. You trap them in the basement. Silence fell over the boardroom. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Leo was the first to speak. He looked at Declan, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. Boss, I like her. Declan's eyes were fixed on Sadie. There was a dangerous heat in his gaze. It was the look of a man who had just found a diamond in a pile of ash. The trap works, Declan said, addressing the room but never taking his eyes off her. But there's one flaw. We don't just want Carver's mercenaries. We want Carver. If he doesn't show up to the pier, he lives to fight another day. Carver is a micromanager, Garrett chimed in, grudgingly accepting the new plan. He won't be on the ground getting his hands dirty, but he'll want to watch it happen. He'll be somewhere close, a command center. How do we flush him out? Leo asked. Declan finally looked away from Sadie, staring at the map. We don't. We invite him to the front row. He turned back to the table. Tonight is the annual Maritime Logistics Gala at the Plaza Hotel. It's a neutral ground. Every shipping magnate, union boss, and dock owner will be there. Carver will be there, playing the legitimate businessman. You want to confront him at a charity gala? Sadie asked. No, I want to smile at him. I want to drink champagne and look completely unbothered. Carver needs to believe the shipment is still arriving uncompromised. He needs to believe Greg did his job. Declan stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. If I look relaxed, he will get overconfident. He'll move to a secondary location near the docks to oversee his men. Once we have his location, my extraction team will pay him a visit while his mercs are trapped on the pier. The lieutenants nodded, the plan solidifying in their minds. They began to stand, the tension in the room shifting from anxiety to anticipation. Garrett, prep the men. Suppressed weapons only. We keep this quiet, Declan ordered. Leo, find out what hotel Carver is operating out of. The men filed out of the room, leaving Declan and Sadie alone. Declan walked over to where she was sitting. He leaned against the edge of the heavy mahogany table, looking down at her. You played them perfectly, he said quietly. You didn't just give them a tactical advantage. You made them respect you. They respect violence, Declan. I just pointed them in the right direction. Sadie looked up at him. Are you really going to the gala tonight? We are, Declan corrected. I need my executive secretary with me to maintain the illusion of business as usual. Sadie hesitated. I don't have anything to wear to a gala at the plaza. Declan reached out. His knuckles brushed lightly against the lapel of her blazer, dangerously close to her throat. The casual intimacy of the gesture sent a spike of heat straight into her chest. I've already taken care of it, he murmured. Go back to the penthouse. Rest your arm. Tonight we smile for the cameras. Tomorrow we go to war. The dress was a weapon. Sadie stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the guest bedroom of Declan's penthouse, staring at her reflection. When she had arrived back at the apartment, a sleek black garment bag was waiting on the bed. It was an emerald green silk gown. It clung to her waist and hips before flowing to the floor in a liquid sweep of fabric. The neckline was sharp and geometric, elegant but severe. But the true genius of the dress was the left sleeve, a sheer, dramatic capelet that cascaded over her shoulder, perfectly concealing the bulky bandage on her bicep. She didn't look like a secretary. She didn't look like a civilian. She looked like money, secrets, and danger. A quiet knock sounded at the door. "Are you decent?" Declan's voice was muffled through the wood. "Yes." Declan opened the door and stepped inside. He was wearing a bespoke black tuxedo that fit him with predatory perfection. The severe cut of the suit accentuated the broadness of his shoulders and the cold, unyielding lines of his face. He looked like the devil on his way to a wedding. He stopped dead when he saw her. For 5 agonizing seconds, neither of them spoke. Declan's eyes dragged over her, starting from the sensible black heels peeking out beneath the hem of the silk gown, up the curve of her waist, to the exposed skin of her collarbone, and finally meeting her gaze. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with a tension that had nothing to do with rival syndicates or stolen shipments. "The dress fits," Sadie said, her voice slightly breathless. She hated that she sounded breathless. Declan closed the distance between them. He moved with a terrifying grace for a man his size. He stopped inches away from her, looking at her in the mirror rather than directly. "It fits," he agreed, his voice a low gravel scrape. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a small, flat object. He held it out to her. Sadie looked down. It was a tactical push dagger. The grip was contoured black carbon fiber, and the short, lethal blade was made of non-metallic ceramic. It wouldn't trigger a metal detector. "Your clutch is on the dresser," Declan said softly, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "Slip this inside. The plaza has tight security, but Carver doesn't play by the rules. If anyone touches you tonight, you don't hesitate. You aim for the neck or the femoral artery." Sadie took the knife. The grip was warm from his body heat. She slid it smoothly into the small, velvet clutch resting nearby. "I won't hesitate," she promised. Declan turned, offering her his arm. "Let's go feed the wolves." The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of crystal chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and the suffocating smell of expensive perfume. An orchestra played a low, sweeping waltz in the corner. It was a room filled with the richest, most powerful people on the eastern seaboard, and half of them belonged in federal prison. When Declan and Sadie walked through the gilded double doors, heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd. Declan Hayes rarely attended public events, and he almost never brought a +1. Sadie kept her chin high, her face a mask of polite, untouchable composure. She felt the weight of 100 calculating stares, dissecting her, trying to figure out where she fit into the criminal ecosystem. A waiter passed by. Declan took 2 flutes of champagne, handing one to Sadie. 2 o'clock, Declan murmured, barely moving his lips as he raised his glass. By the ice sculpture, Sadie turned her head casually. Standing by a massive melting swan was Thomas Carver. He was a thick-necked, brutally handsome man in his late 40s, wearing a tuxedo that looked slightly too tight across the chest. He was laughing loudly at a joke told by a city councilman. "He looks confident," Sadie observed softly. He thinks he's about to steal $4 million and cripple my distribution network, Declan replied, taking a sip of his drink. Let's go say hello. Sadie felt her heart slam against her ribs, but she didn't let it show on her face. She rested her good hand lightly on Declan's forearm, feeling the hard, coiled muscle beneath the fabric of his jacket. They navigated through the crowd. As they approached, Carver spotted them. The loud laughter died instantly. A predatory gleam sparked in his pale blue eyes. "Declan Hayes!" Carver boomed, spreading his arms in a mock gesture of welcome. "I didn't think you had time for rubber chicken dinners. Figured you'd be too busy managing the docks. Heavy weather rolling in tonight, I hear." It was a test. A subtle probe to see if Declan was nervous about the incoming shipment. Declan smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "The weather is fine, Thomas. My ships always come in on time." Carver's eyes flicked to Sadie. He looked her up and down with blatant, insulting appraisal. "And who is this lovely creature? You holding out on us, Declan?" "This is Ms. Collins," Declan said, his voice dropping half an octave, laced with a subtle, unmistakable threat. "She keeps my schedule in order," Carver chuckled, stepping uncomfortably close. He reeked of gin and expensive cigars. "A secretary? Jesus, Declan, dressed like that, I thought she was the main attraction." "Tell me, Ms. Collins, does he pay you enough to deal with all his heavy lifting?" Carver reached out, aiming to patronizingly pat Sadie on the shoulder, her injured shoulder. Before his fingers could make contact, Declan's hand shot out. He gripped Carver's wrist. It wasn't a warning tap. It was a vice grip that crushed bone against bone. The polite chatter around them seemed to dim. Carver's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine pain and sudden rage. "Don't touch her," Declan whispered, his tone so violently cold it made the hairs on Sadie's arms stand up. "You don't have the clearance." For a second, Sadie thought Carver was going to swing. She shifted her weight, her right hand drifting toward the clasp of her velvet clutch, her fingers itching for the ceramic blade. But Carver yanked his arm back, rubbing his wrist. He forced a tight, ugly smile. "Relax, Hayes, just being friendly." He took a step back. "Enjoy the party. It's going to be a long night." Carver turned and disappeared into the crowd. Declan didn't move. He kept his eyes fixed on Carver's retreating back. "Did you see it?" "His left pocket," Sadie said instantly, releasing her grip on the clutch. "He checked his phone right before we walked up. He's expecting a text. The strike team." "Exactly." Declan turned to her, the violent edge bleeding out of his eyes, replaced by a fierce, blazing approval. "He's getting anxious. He'll leave the gala within the hour to get to a secure location and monitor the comms." Declan pulled a small earpiece from his pocket and slipped it into his left ear. He pressed a button on his watch. "Leo," Declan spoke quietly into the lapel of his jacket. "Carver is leaving soon. Put the tracker on his town car. It's time to go hunting." They left the plaza before the dessert plates were cleared. The heavy, humid air of the New York night hit them the moment they stepped out from beneath the gilded awning. A black, up-armored SUV was idling at the curb, the exhaust pluming white in the damp streetlights. Leo was in his driver's seat. He didn't open the door for them. Declan did it himself, ushering Sadie into the back seat before sliding in beside her. The heavy doors slammed shut with the pressurized thud of a bank vault. The classical music of the gala was instantly severed, replaced by the low, tactical hum of the vehicle's police scanner and the rumble of a V8 engine. "Tracker is live," Leo said, his eyes meeting Declan's in the rearview mirror. He tapped a glowing green dot on the GPS monitor mounted to the dashboard. "Carver's town car just crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. He's heading toward Red Hook. He wants a vantage point," Declan replied, stripping off his tuxedo jacket. He tossed the $1,000 silk garment into the cargo area. From under the seat, he pulled a Kevlar vest and strapped it over his crisp white dress shirt. "Are Garrett's men in position at Gate 4? "Holding steady," Leo confirmed, merging the heavy SUV aggressively into the late-night traffic. Carver's trucks are 3 miles out from the pier, moving dark. Declan reached into a steel lockbox bolted between the seats. He withdrew the suppressed Sig Sauer and racked the slide. The sharp, metallic crack of the action was deafening in the enclosed space. He looked over at Sadie. She sat rigid, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the ceramic push dagger concealed perfectly within her velvet clutch. The emerald gown pooled around her, a ridiculous, beautiful contradiction to the violence unfolding in the vehicle. "I can have Leo drop you at a safe house," Declan offered. His voice was even, stripping away the command and leaving only a choice. "You did your job, Sadie. You built the trap. You don't have to watch it snap shut." Sadie turned at her head. The streetlight strobed across her face, highlighting the sharp angles of her jaw and the dark, exhausted hollows under her eyes. "If Carver escapes, he knows I'm the one who figured out his mole," she said, her voice devoid of panic. It was a simple calculation. "He'll send men to my apartment. He'll send men to my sister's house in Queens. A safe house only works if you plan on hiding forever." She reached down, grabbed the hem of her silk gown, and pulled. The seam tore with a sharp, violent sound, splitting up to her mid-thigh. She kicked off the sensible black heels, leaving her barefoot on the rubber floor mats. She wasn't preparing to run. She was preparing to fight. "I'm staying," she said. Declan stared at the torn silk, then up to her eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched, a micro-expression of pure, unadulterated pride. He reached into the lockbox again and pulled out a spare radio earpiece, handing it to her. "Keep the volume low," he instructed. "Garrett will be calling the play on the tactical channel. You stay behind me. You do exactly what I say. No heroics." "I'm an executive secretary, Declan," she deadpanned, slipping the earpiece in. "Heroics aren't in my job description. Just survival." The SUV tore through the empty streets of Red Hook, the looming rusted skeletons of the shipping cranes rising in the distance. The GPS dot stopped moving. "He's stationary," Leo announced, killing the headlights as they rolled into an abandoned industrial park. "Old grain silo, 5 stories up, direct line of sight to Pier 40 across the water." Declan checked his magazine, slamming it home. How many men with him? "Thermal imaging from the drone shows 4 heat signatures on the top floor," Leo said, tapping a secondary monitor. "Carver and 3 guards. The rest of his muscle is in the trucks hitting the pier. We go up the fire escape. Quiet." Declan grabbed a matte black rifle from the rack, checking the optics. He looked at Leo. "You take the point. Sadie, you are between us." They piled out of the vehicle into the damp, garbage-scented alleyway. The air tasted of salt and diesel fumes. Sadie shivered, the cool night air biting at the exposed skin of her shoulders, but she gripped her clutch tightly, her thumb resting on the magnetic clasp. Above them, the grain silo loomed like a concrete monolith against the starless sky. They moved, no talking, just the scrape of boots on rusted iron as they climbed the exterior fire escape. Sadie's bare feet were silent, though the jagged metal bit into her soles. She didn't make a sound. She kept her eyes glued to the broad, Kevlar-clad back of Declan Hayes. Click. The radio in her ear crackled to life. Garrett's voice hissed through the static, tight with adrenaline. "Boss, 3 transport trucks just pulled up to Gate 4. They're cutting the padlock now." Declan pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece as they reached the 4th floor landing. "Let them in, Garrett. Don't engage until the last bumper clears the threshold." Sadie leaned against the cold brick wall, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. They were 1 floor below Carver's command center. She could hear the faint, muffled sound of a radio echoing from above. Carver was listening to his men. "They're inside," Garrett's voice reported, barely a whisper. Moving into the central yard, the container stacks are blocking their line of sight to the water. Declan met Sadie's eyes in the dark. He gave her a single, slow nod. Her trap was working. "Lock the door, Garrett," Declan ordered. On Pier 40, a mile across the black water, absolute hell broke loose. Through the earpiece, Sadie heard the heavy, metallic screech of Gate 4 being manually slammed shut, followed by the definitive thud of the drop bar sliding into place. "Gate secure! They're boxed!" Garrett yelled, dropping the stealthy whisper. "Light 'em up!" The radio feed exploded into a chaotic symphony of suppressed automatic gunfire, shattering glass and screaming metal. Above them, on the 5th floor of the silo, Sadie heard a man shout in panic. "Carver! They're pinned! Move! Move! Move!" Declan barked, abandoning the stealth approach. Leo kicked the rusted access door off its hinges. It slammed onto the concrete floor of the 5th level with a deafening crash. Declan was through the frame a fraction of a second later, his rifle raised. The top floor of the silo was a sprawling, empty concrete expanse, littered with old wooden pallets and a makeshift table covered in radio equipment. Pft. Declan fired twice. The suppressed shots were quiet, but the impact was devastating. The guard standing nearest to the radio table dropped instantly, a neat hole punched through his forehead. The remaining 2 guards scrambled, pulling sidearms from their jackets. "Down!" Declan roared, grabbing Sadie by the uninjured shoulder and shoving her hard behind a thick concrete pillar. Gunfire erupted. Real, unsilenced gunfire. The concussive blasts of 9mm rounds echoed through the cavernous silo, chipping the concrete just inches from Sadie's head. Gray dust rained down onto her emerald silk dress. Leo returned fire with a heavy shotgun, the booming blasts shaking the floorboards. Sadie crouched tight against the pillar, her knees pulled to her chest. Her heart was beating so fast it blurred into a single, continuous vibration against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe. She opened her clutch. She wrapped her right hand around the carbon fiber grip of the push dagger and pulled it free. The gunfire stopped abruptly. A heavy ringing silence fell over the room. "Clear right," Leo grunted. "Clear left," Declan replied. Sadie peeked around the edge of the pillar. The 2 remaining guards were bleeding out on the floor, but Thomas Carver was not among them. "Where is he?" Declan snarled, sweeping his rifle across the shadows. A scuffling sound came from the far corner, near a dark, narrow corridor that led to an old freight elevator. "Leo, watch the stairs!" Declan ordered, moving forward with fluid, lethal grace. He melted into the shadows of the corridor, chasing Carver's retreat. Sadie stayed put. She knew better than to wander into a blind spot. She pressed her back against the cold concrete, the ceramic blade held tightly against her thigh. A shadow shifted to her left, not in the corridor, behind a stack of rotting wooden pallets near the shattered windows. It wasn't Carver. It was a fourth guard. The thermal drone had been wrong, or the heat signatures had overlapped. The man stepped out. He was young, terrified, and holding a Glock with shaking hands. His eyes locked onto Sadie. He didn't see Leo, who was covering the stairwell on the opposite side of the room. He only saw the woman in the green dress. He raised the gun, aiming it at her chest. "Hey!" the kid yelled, his voice cracking. Sadie didn't freeze. The paralyzing terror she had expected didn't come. Instead, the same cold, calculating emptiness that had taken over in Declan's bathroom washed through her veins. "Show him empty hands," her brain whispered. She dropped the velvet clutch. It hit the floor with a soft thud. She raised her left arm, the bandaged one, high in the air, palm open in a gesture of surrender. The kid hesitated. His eyes flicked to her raised hand. A fatal 1-second distraction. Sadie lunged. She drove off her bare feet, closing the 5 feet between them before he could realign his sights. She didn't try to wrestle the gun away. She didn't scream. She stepped inside his guard, her right hand coming up in a brutal, upward arc. The ceramic blade punched through the soft tissue just under his jawline. The kid's eyes went wide. The gun fired into the ceiling, the deafening crack echoing through the silo. Sadie ripped the blade sideways and stepped back, letting gravity do the rest. The man collapsed, clutching his throat, a dark, pulsing spray of blood painting the concrete floor. Leo spun around, his shotgun leveled, but stopped dead when he saw the scene. He looked at the dying man, then up at Sadie. She was standing over him, the bloody push dagger held loosely in her right hand, her chest heaving. "Christ," Leo muttered. Footsteps echoed from the dark corridor. Declan emerged, dragging a bleeding, cursing Thomas Carver by the collar of his tailored suit. Carver had a bullet hole through his calf and was leaving a thick, wet trail on the concrete. Declan threw Carver to the floor in the center of the room. Then Declan saw the fourth body. He saw Sadie. He saw the fresh blood splattered across the emerald silk of her dress. He dropped his rifle. It clattered to the floor. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, ignoring Carver, ignoring Leo, and stopped directly in front of her. He grabbed her face with both hands. His palms were rough, calloused, and trembling slightly. "Are you hit?" Declan demanded, his eyes frantically scanning her torso, searching for a bullet hole. "Sadie, look at me. Are you hit?" "No," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her hands were starting to shake. He hesitated. "I didn't." Declan let out a long, shuddering breath. He pressed his forehead against hers. It was a fiercely intimate gesture, completely entirely out of place in a room filled with corpses and gunpowder. "You didn't hesitate," Declan repeated softly, the words sounding like a prayer. He pulled back, his eyes dark and burning as he looked at her. "Good." "Hayes!" Carver screamed from the floor, clutching his bleeding leg. "You think you won? You think a shipping container of rifles is worth a war with Boston? My brother will burn this city to the ground." Declan didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Sadie. "Leo," Declan said quietly. "Yeah, boss. Take Carver to the meatpacking plant on 14th Street. Hang him up. I'll be there in an hour to ask him about his brother." "You got it." Leo grabbed Carver by the lapels and hauled him toward the stairs, ignoring the man's agonized screaming. Declan gently pried the bloody push dagger from Sadie's rigid fingers. He wiped the blade clean on his slacks and tucked it into his pocket. Then he unstrapped his Kevlar vest, pulled off his white dress shirt, and wrapped the clean, warm fabric around her bare shoulders, covering the bloodstains on her dress. "Let's go home, Sadie," he said. The penthouse was exactly as they had left it. Quiet, immaculate, smelling faintly of expensive whiskey and rain. Declan locked the deadbolt and turned to face the hallway. Sadie stood in the center of the Persian rug. She looked utterly exhausted. The adrenaline had finally burned off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made her sway slightly on her bare, bruised feet. She pulled Declan's oversized shirt tighter around her shoulders. "I need to wash my hands," she said quietly. "Come here." Declan led her into the master bathroom. It was a cavernous space of black marble and brushed steel. He turned on the gold faucet, letting the water run until it was steaming hot. He didn't hand her a towel. He took her hands in his own. He pumped a heavy dollop of soap into his palm and began to wash the blood from her skin. His movements were slow, methodical, and impossibly gentle. He worked the soap over her knuckles, between her fingers, washing away the residue of the man she had killed in the silo. Sadie watched his hands. Large, scarred hands that commanded a criminal empire, currently performing an act of quiet, absolute devotion. "Garrett called while we were in the car," Declan said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet bathroom. "Carver's men surrendered. The ones who survived, anyway. They realized they were trapped in a steel box with no backup. The container from Odessa is secure." "And Carver?" she asked. "Carver is a problem for tomorrow." Declan rinsed the soap from her hands, the pink-tinged water swirling down the drain. He grabbed a thick towel and dried her skin, patting softly. He leaned back against the counter, looking down at her. "You know," Declan started, his voice rough, "when you knocked on my door yesterday, bleeding and barefoot, I thought you were a liability. I thought you were a civilian who got caught in the crossfire of my world." Sadie looked up, meeting his eyes. "And now?" "Now," Declan said, taking a step closer, erasing the distance between them. "I think my world might not be ready for you." He reached up, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, stopping just below her ear. His thumb brushed against her pulse point. It was beating steady and strong. "You can't go back to the desk, Sadie," he told her, the absolute truth hanging heavy in the air. "You can't go back to typing memos and scheduling lunches. Not after this. Not after what you did. Not after what you showed them tonight." "I don't want to go back to the desk," she whispered. The admission hung between them, a final, definitive severing of her old life. She wasn't just accepting the darkness. She was stepping into it willingly. Declan's gaze dropped to her lips. The polite, professional restraint he had maintained for 3 years shattered completely. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hard, desperate, and tasting of gunpowder and adrenaline. Sadie gasped, her good hand coming up to fist in the fabric of his undershirt, pulling him closer. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off the cold marble floor, pressing her back against the bathroom counter. All the terror, the violence, and the unspoken tension of the last 24 hours poured into the connection. It was a claiming, a recognition of equals. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing heavily. Declan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Tomorrow," Declan murmured, his voice a rough, ragged scrape. "I have to interrogate Thomas Carver. I have to secure the eastern docks. I have to pay off a precinct captain." Sadie opened her eyes. The mild-mannered secretary was dead and buried. In her place was a woman who knew exactly how much power she held in the room. "Then you better get some sleep, Declan," she said softly, tracing the line of his jaw with her clean fingers. "Because starting tomorrow, my consultation fees are going up." Declan laughed. It was a dark, genuine sound that echoed off the marble walls. He pulled her against his chest, holding her tight, burying his face in her hair. The ledger was closed, the debt was paid, and the King of New York had just found his queen. The transition from a quiet secretary to a mafia queen is complete, but Sadie and Declan's war is just beginning. Thomas Carver's brother is still out there, and Boston won't take this defeat quietly. What did you think of Sadie's brutal evolution? Did she adapt too quickly, or was this darkness always inside her? Drop a comment below and let me know your theories.